Why do people do sick and twisted things in games? Let's take a deep dive into the dark side and find out. For as long as there have been games, people have been doing awful, terrible things in them. That includes murdering innocent bards in Ultima Online, forcing your opponents to disrobe and then making them dance at gunpoint in Rust, and of course, barbecuing your baby in The Sims. But of all the places that you can do terrible things in the world of games, DayZ is hands down the worst. You can capture, kidnap, enslave, torture, even hogtie and castrate other characters.
Why are you shooting me in the
Ugh. I found this lovely, heartwarming story of someone who was lured to an abandoned house via walkie-talkie playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips and then was immediately murdered.
What did you do to him?
What the f? What the f? People are clearly indulging in some sick, twisted, and psychopathic fantasies, but it does raise this interesting question. Why did so much of this stuff happen in DayZ? Are the players just completely immoral, or is something else going on? Now you're probably thinking, Jamin, come on, no need for an interrogation. This is just a game. Doing rotten things to others is a natural part of the Darwinian continuum of online human behavior. And that's true, but there is a real-world person behind that awfulness who's deciding to roleplay as Michael Myers from Halloween. We're not saying that this is inherently wrong or bad. Part of the brilliance and beauty of a game like DayZ is that it gives you this massive open world and allows you to do whatever it is that you want, even the disturbing. But you have to admit, some of the things that are happening in games like DayZ go far beyond general Sims tomfoolery. Research shows that trolls and griefers exhibit what's called the dark tetrad: Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, and sadism on personality tests. That means that they're conniving, self-centered, totally crazy, and enjoy torturing others. Like these guys who go around promising to take new players to safety in a bus, but instead drive them out to the middle of nowhere and force them to engage in gladiator matches to the death at gunpoint.
Guys, we're all friends here. Don't do it.
Granted, this is just a computer simulation, and hopefully there's a big difference between hog-tying someone in DayZ and becoming the real-life Marquis de Sade. But there's a really good counterexample in the 1963 Milgram experiment. This was this famous experiment where normal, everyday people were led to believe that they were administering lethal doses of electric shock to complete strangers. It was really good times. We'll link to it in the description. In 2009, researchers recreated the Milgram experiment, but in a virtual environment. As it turns out, people still felt the same physiological pangs of guilt as if they were shocking living people, even though they were clearly interacting with someone who was virtual. I can't wait for this thing to come out for the Oculus Rift. So it's very possible that the meanies getting their sadistic kicks in DayZ lack the empathy that common, decent people have. Or they're just full-blown psychopaths.
Drop your fire axe. And your pants.
After all, you can choose to play DayZ however you want, and these people are choosing insanity. So that settles it, right? They should be watched by the police and held accountable. End of story. But maybe not. Here's where things get a little bit complicated. If we take a close look at a game like DayZ, there's a good chance that the game actually encourages you to act sadistically. Unfortunately, good and evil aren't really cut and dry. Environmental factors can actually push us towards evil. In the Stanford prison experiment, for example, normal, everyday college students were asked to play guards and prisoners in a mock prison. And after just a day, the entire project descended into madness, with a third of the prison guards exhibiting sadistic tendencies. If we take a close look at DayZ, we'll find the same types of structural madness.
You either tell your friends to back off or you're gonna die. Alright.
The design of the game provides a clear path towards inflicting pain, suffering, and humiliation on others. So how does this happen? Well, one thing psychological research shows is that normal, everyday people just don't become psychopaths overnight. Normally, it's preceded by a series of kind of smaller, lesser evil tasks before just jumping on the train to Psycholand.
Left me some beans.
And DayZ provides an abundance of ways for you to actually get there. For one, you're thrown into this world with an avatar that looks kinda like a neo-Nazi.
Freaking Nazis, man! You're freaking Nazis!
As the Proteus effect shows, people tend to behave in ways that they think their avatar would behave like. So if you make your character a gas-masked psycho killer, then you're much more likely to actually act that way than if you make your character, I don't know, a suburban housewife housewife wearing mom jeans. Second, the game is really harsh. It tries to accurately simulate what it would be like to be alive during a zombie apocalypse, which means no Chipotle and a lot of permadeath. Because food, supplies, and ammo are very scarce, it's very easy to dehumanize other people. You just look at other characters like walking gear and ammo dumps who only exist so you can kill them to keep yourself alive. On top of that, there's no external authority or mechanic that prevents players from enacting this brutal tendency. Those two things, dehumanization and the lack of an outside authority, are key factors in the psychology of sadism. Third, DayZ has no clear goal, aside from not getting held up at gunpoint and being forced to eat disinfectant. You're in this desolate place with axes and duct tape and handcuffs, and people have nothing better to do than just screw with each other.
Oh, Eddie! Eddie! No! Oh, Eddie!
Are you not entertained?
Just check out this Reddit thread about what to do once you finally have your gear in DayZ. The first comment is finding your death. And finally, DayZ encourages a group dynamic among friends and strangers. So when one member of your group decides to push the envelope and, I don't know, abduct a castaway, and another decides to, I don't know, maybe bleed him to the brink of death, and a third, I don't know, maybe make that person a slave, all of which actually happens in the game, by the way, you're more likely to, I don't know, just go with the flow. It's no one's fault. There's a diffusion of personal responsibility. When you add all this up, it might not justify or explain all the terrible things that happen in DayZ, but the cherry on top is that intimidation is a very effective strategy if you want to survive. I mean, you're not gonna mess with someone who you just saw force a guy to drink bleach, are you? So maybe the way that people act in DayZ or any other game isn't as insane as it might seem, but maybe it's just a rational response to a system that's been constructed. As game designer Genova Chen has said, it's not that gamers are good or bad, it's the interactive piece that influences their behavior. In other words, if you don't want people to act like animals, don't put them in cages. To be clear, what I'm not saying is that people don't have personal responsibility for what they do, nor am I saying that all the terrible things that happen in the world, real or virtual, are the result of deterministic design. But what I am saying is that our environments, they affect us, and sometimes that effect is really negative. But even if DayZ is some twisted, freaky, psychological hell, it teaches some valuable lessons about online communities. It shows that design matters, and game designers should be more aware about the atmosphere that they're trying to create. So the next time that someone takes you hostage in DayZ, just explain to them it's not really their fault. Then give them everything in your backpack. Your life depends on it. So what do you think? Did the reasons I just outlined give a good explanation for why people do sick and twisted things in games like DayZ? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about why sex scenes in games are so terrible. Let's see what you had to say. Antonia Bologna, hello again, has a very specific perspective on sex, specifically that sex should only be portrayed in photography and in painting. The argument being that sex is beautiful when it's captured in a moment in time, but bodies in motion, that just kind of like makes things all weird. I guess the big thing I would disagree with you on is whether or not sex has to be portrayed as a beautiful thing. So if you look at painting, the work of a French painter Balthus, for example, who just had an exhibition at the Met recently, his paintings are often of young prepubescent teenagers, and those aren't necessarily beautiful images. They're anything but that. They're grotesque and disturbing. But I do think that if you limit yourself to just the idea that portrayals of sex in media have to be beautiful, I think that limits all the different ways in which it's not. And the ways in which it's not is what makes us human, and that's really what art is for. Brotier says that the big barrier is actually the ESRB, which is the ratings body, which, rated M for mature. And I think that's a really good point. If you look at the early history, the inception of the ESRB, it's really predicated on this core idea, which is that games are for kids. And if you look back at like some of the congressional back and forth at the time period, that was really what the dust-up was about. It wasn't that the fact that Mortal Kombat was violent, or even really about the level of violence in Mortal Kombat somehow being worse than things that were being shown at the time. But it was based on this core idea that games are for kids, and we're still working our way out of that. So that's why, sex in video games, if it's you can do all kinds of violent things to people, and that won't get you an AO rating. But if you show sex, that's something that might get you in the hot water. Some of it, at least in the United States, is the puritanical leanings that we have. I know it's like that in other countries too, but I do think a lot of it's based on this idea that we're uncomfortable with the idea that games can tackle mature subjects, but we'll grow out of it. Orange Vision makes the excellent point that many game designers look to other media to figure out how they should portray sex. And so if you look to other media, then you will do things like cutscenes, right? Which are these little movies. Sometimes they're vaguely interactive, but most of the time they're not. I think that that's an excellent point. One of the things that game designers still need to figure out is how to deal with and talk about sexuality in its own language, which is the language of games. I mean, games are still trying to figure out how to do story really well. So it's not a surprise that sex, which is a very, very complicated human activity, has thwarted them thus far. But I still have hope. But yeah, as long as game designers are always looking at other places to figure out what sex means in their medium, they'll always be coming up short. 10 Times Over says it's a trap that actually all the sex scenes from games that we showed aren't actually real and that we just put them in the video to drive views. Well, first of all, if only were that easy that you could just like put sexy things in YouTube videos and that would just like fart out 1 billion views or whatever. But actually, you know what? You're on to it. So behind this mod is set, you can't see it, but there are tens of thousands of animators who've been working tirelessly over the last half decade to construct several full-length AAA games just that we could take little 5-second snippets to put in this YouTube video. So I'm glad you noticed. I'm really glad you noticed the craftsmanship. Half Raccoon Scientist, first of all, I'm curious what the other half is. Anyway, Half Raccoon Scientist takes issue with this idea that sex is treated as a form of entitlement in games. And no, I'm not saying that happens in all games, but I am saying that that's problematic, and let me explain to you why. Oftentimes game designers use different things, such as the big Goron sword in Ocarina of Time, which you mentioned, as a way to encourage or incentivize players to move forward. And I'm saying is that if a game designer is using sex as the carrot at the end of that very, very long stick, that limits the expressive capabilities of the medium to talk about all the different facets of human sexuality. So I think the games are capable of doing all of those things, but if you limit it just to sex as a reward for completing a set of actions, if you essentially you equate sex with the big Goron sword or just any other item or thing that you could do with the game, that's a problem long term for what we think of games.